It's especially a great treat for me to be here to address all of you. As Neil mentioned, what's precipitated this was a discussion that began earlier this year or late last year. Neil had approached some members of the buildingSMART community and was asking about IFC because they had sent out their questionnaire, and the response from all of you was IFC development, IFC compatibility was important. So we began the conversation. And then in Dusseldorf, the spring standard summit, Neil and Sergey were there to be a part of the community, see what was going on, see what people were doing with their projects, understand how the standards process worked within buildingSMART. And as a result of that, we went forward with this partnership. And as Neil said, I think there's a great deal of synergy. There's a great deal of energy to provide this opportunity to make sure that customers, end users, understand that the value is not in the tools, but in their data, and that they need to be able to access that data and move it around whenever and wherever they need to. So the idea is we want to improve the situation that's occurring today, right? We want to remove these barriers. We want to remove these incompatibilities. We want also to lower the threshold for vendors such as yourselves and new vendors and small vendors to be able to include IFC capability for BIM solutions. We also want to have a higher quality result, not just for the vendors, but ultimately for the end users. And at the same time, one of the prospects that Neil brought to us was this idea of being able to actually prototype candidate standards before they went to final status with the different versions of IFC. So I know I see some familiar faces in the room. How many of you know that your company is a member of buildingSMART International? Can you raise your hands? Okay, so not that many. How many of you are even aware of buildingSMART International before I said? Okay, well that's good. That's good. So it's not all new. All right, so what is buildingSMART International? buildingSMART's mission is really to enable the digitization of the entire built asset industry. We're going beyond buildings now. Okay? Up until this point, it was about buildings. It's bigger than that. And it's not just about design to construction. This is the entire life cycle. This is circular. This starts from an idea to designing something, through the procurement stage, through the construction stage, through the operations stage, even to decommissioning. It's being able to add data, collect data, and make use of that data throughout the entire life cycle of not just buildings, but the entire built environment, of cities, of moving that scale, right? So I think this image from Digital Built Britain, produced about 3 years ago, really kind of gives us a visualization of what that is. Now, that technical engagement happens in face-to-face. We have an ISG meeting. In fact, I'm leaving tomorrow to go to Helsinki for our 2-day meeting. We meet twice a year. But we also have web-based services. This is a continual effort. And so just this last year, we've upgraded our communication systems with buildingSMART. So we have a public forum that is meant for end users. It's meant for developers. There's different categories, different parts of the forum for different people to interact. It could be experienced vendors, longtime companies. It could be new vendors or new developers. We have also the technical website. So the old technical website, buildingsmart-tech.org, was a bit outdated, long in the tooth, no longer had an administrator. So we've switched that to a new platform with keeping up-to-date information, kind of cleared out all of the other stuff. And then we are using GitHub now to be the repository for a lot of our open source efforts. And eventually we're even moving IFC development to GitHub and creating a number of tools that will allow the extension projects and changes and all that to occur through GitHub. So buildingSMART is involved with standards, right? And those standards include the IDM, IFC, and IFD, or BSDD. What does that mean? So the information delivery manual is about process. It's about business processes and data requirements. Industry foundation classes is about the fundamental data schema. We have all of this information. What's important is to give it a semantic context, right? How do we get people to understand what a wall is in one marketplace versus a wall in another marketplace? What are the components of that wall? How do they equalize? We are in a global industry. So parts can come from any part of the world to a project any other part of the world. And expertise in designing those can do that, and expertise in operating them. So we need to be able to provide some type of system through the buildingSMART Data Dictionary that allows not just language, but concepts to be rationalized. So in terms of the technical focus, the technical room is really working to support all of these through things like, how is the information delivery manual documented, right? How do we document processes? How do we make sure that we standardize the way that the parts of those processes can be communicated and traded with each other? For IFC, there's the editing and the creation of the standard, there's formats, there's exchange protocols and exchange formats. And then for the buildingSMART Data Dictionary, we're looking at various other ways through APIs, through different data stores, and through different database management. But what we're really focusing on here today, and what we're really focusing on with this agreement, is IFC. And how can we do a better job of building the IFC environment, of forwarding the IFC agenda or mission in the marketplace? So how do we get there? Over the last few years, buildingSMART has professionalized, so we now have a CEO, we have our operations director, we have a marketing director. I work as a contract staff for buildingSMART, not only as the ISG leader, but as a technical coordinator for some of those web services, and also as a coordinator for the projects within the technical room. And we now have in process a very rigorous process of how do we take an idea about improving the BIM, the built asset industry globally, and come up with a standard on the other end. What we're trying to focus on, though, with ODA is how can we test those ideas before they become a final standard, right? This is something that buildingSMART has struggled with for 20 years before we finally got to this point. And part of it took leadership from end users, and part of it just took knowledge and leadership from the industry, from the software industry, to move this idea forward. Because what we want to do is we want to have well-developed use cases, right? We don't want people just popping up ideas and saying, hey, we should include this, we should do this, without having a rigorous process that tests it across multiple markets, right? Multiple users. And then deal with software first. Before we solidify something as an international standard, set in ISO concrete, if you will, we need to be able to test it in software first. It's kind of funny how we hadn't done that before, right? I mean, this is generally how the software industry works. You have beta versions. You test these things before you go to final release. This is the way we're going to deal with IFC now. And the idea is we also want to be faster to market with newer versions, right? As time goes on, people have more and more demands. We need to be able to create more capacity for IFC to deal with these demands. So as a part of that, we have to treat IFC just like we treat software, right? My experience in the software industry is I worked for Vectorworks for 12 and a half years on both the R&D side and the product marketing side. I learned a lot as an architect about software engineering. We took that knowledge and I said, you know, why don't we treat IFC the same way that we treat our internal code? We have a main line, we have these branches. What we do is we allow these different projects, things like bridge and road, to then create a branch and begin to develop schema extensions and schema changes, and then feed that back up into the system and publish it as we need. But that's very hard to do, right? It's hard to do without some tooling and some process standards and able to do that. And I think this is the exciting part about the ODA partnership, is it really allows us to get into this, right? Because what ODA is committed to doing is saying, hey, once you have a candidate standard, the beta version of IFC that has new functionality, let's roll out the libraries for that and allow software to go ahead and start implementing it. And then we can go through test projects and then iron out all the bugs and then move it forward into final status. This is a huge step for us in the buildingSMART community. It's a huge step for the built asset industry. What we hope to see is faster turnaround times. We hope to see better use of IFC and better support and higher quality support in the products that support it. But we also know that the future, we have to get better, as I said before. So we see sort of IFC as this growing organism. And in the past, it has been a slow growth. There's well-meaning. It's tried to do a lot of things, and it's tried to drag the industry along in order to move it forward. With IFC 4, we've done a lot in sort of modernizing some concepts of it and trying to rationalize some archaic language, but we know we have to do more. With IFC 5, we're including all of these new infrastructure projects. But we know with the next version of IFC, we have to improve it even more. And what does that look like? We're not sure yet. That's why we're trying to get more and more of you involved in this process, as well as the end users. And ultimately, we know that this is going to go in a direction that we can't foresee all of the possibilities yet, right? I tell people all the time, the building industry tends to be about 10 to 15, if not 20 years behind the rest of the computing industry. There's so many things out there that the wider computing industry is doing today that we haven't utilized yet. So how can we utilize those things? And as we look to the future and we look at how general computing has moved forward in language development and platform support, how can we do the same thing with IFC? Do we need to move away from things like STEP and look at other possibilities for making this information accessible and transportable? So what are those possibilities? Some we're even working on today, things like JSON, things like OWL. These are active projects that are going on right now. There's a lot of demand for a database version of IFC. How do we get that to happen, right? So in each of these cases, whether it's the schema development, whether it's the types of formats that we're dealing with, or the tooling for use, we have ideas about what we're doing now and where we could go in the near future, but that's not to say it's set in stone. That's not to say it can't change. I think the most exciting thing that I've seen in the 9 years that I've been involved with buildingSMART is that in the last 5 years, there's been this accelerated pace of change, which is great. Because more and more people are understanding the value of having that technology and that value of having those standards and being able to have that data being portable and exchangeable and shareable. So we're interested in creating an open ecosystem for technology, and ODA is a significant part of this, right? We understand that BSI is responsible ultimately for the schema. And we're going to have to create tools, better tools, in order to deal with how that schema is edited, how it's conceived or even represented to people. But at the same time, we're also talking with people like ODA and others, is there a way that BSI can also take control of maybe some lower level things so that there isn't all this diversity in some of the most basic things, like the IFC parser, right? That's a possibility. Now, we don't want to compete and create a toolkit that competes with ODA or anybody else. But what we want to do is we want to ensure that there's quality and consistency across all of these offerings. So just like IFC is a standard for the BIM data, are there ways that we can provide tooling that makes that data exchange more consistent? And then relying on the industry, whether it's ODA or other proprietary vendors or other open source efforts to create those libraries and create those toolkits that allow us to create better quality and open up this ecosystem. I mean, we have to have these things with certification. We have to have a standard viewer. We have to have unit tests. How do we create a consistency very quickly in order to deal with all of that? So, thank you very much. If you have any questions about buildingSMART, I'm going to be around all of today and be more than happy to answer those. If you are a member of buildingSMART and you're not taking advantage of the implementation support group, please come talk to me. As I said, we're meeting in Helsinki on Thursday and Friday, but the next meetings, we schedule those out. I'd be more than happy to have you there as guests and to understand the value of being a part of the buildingSMART community as a vendor. Getting to understand how you can interact with the end users, not just your own users, but a lot of other end users, a lot of other potential customers too. So thank you.